All right, thank you very much, and thank you for coming along. Great to see familiar faces as well as good amount of new faces. So, building production-ready MCP servers. Now, I know that I do have that question, but few slides down the lane. So, but just because William actually asked the question, I'm going to ask, who here works with MCP as we speak, like in
Using it only, like using it.
yeah, or like does it know, like, have you tried MCP, anything to do with, let's say anyone who doesn't know MCP. Oops. All right, cool. So it's actually good. I have a couple of slides. I've actually done a talk last year, I think, in fact, about the MCP, basically doing all the bare basics. But I'm actually going to roll out the first part of the slides a bit slowly now that I know that audience has a bit more questions to help you ease out. But my talk is actually a bit more around how to do it properly enterprise grade. So I'll start with the basics. So if you already know the stuff, hang on with me. We have a few people who needs to understand the MCP. I would like the entire audience to come along that journey because the actual topic is a bit heavy in terms of the technicality and how the enterprise level we are thinking, because it's no longer just a small topic that we are actually working with MCP. When I first did the MCP talk, it's actually the first few slides are from my first slide. So bear with me, same examples and things like that. But to start with, for those who don't know me, I wish by now everyone knows me, that I'm popular, but I'm not. So my name is Randi Ratnayake. I'm working at Orinco as a consultant, cloud architect, as well as DevSecOps is my predominant area. Well, outside of the work, I'm pretty much a dev, like all of you by heart, even though I have my consultancy job at the side. But I'm a dev like you all, we all here. And one of my favorite passions is actually to be with the community doing these sort of things, and this is what like gives me the motivation to come every day. If I had to do this every day, I'll be doing it every day. The only thing is I don't have enough credits plus enough time to actually prepare for a demo only. So things like that limits me, but I'm actually very much passionate about sharing that knowledge with you all. And also I do support and mentor undergraduates, especially around the universities in Melbourne. I do get called out, like, to help them out in their final years of the study, to give them the glimpse of the industry, what's going on. So I'm trying to be engaged with that as well, because that's something that I'm really passionate about. Apart from that, I do MCT training, like that's Microsoft Certified Trainer. So I do the training for the organizations who needs cloud advocacy and cloud practices for their organizations. Enough about me, to the topic. MCP. I think I did ask the question, who knows and who doesn't know the MCP. We already know the answer. But let's have a quick understanding about what the MCP is in a sort of like a very basic story. MCP, if you think about, is nothing but a protocol that it's defined. Of course, like HTTP that we have and everything, it's pretty much defined in a way. It's a protocol designed to basically enable our AI tools. We know that we have plethora of AI tools. Everyone has some sort of like a flavored tool or something that they favorite like. The MCP is basically, in our words, in something that we understand, is nothing but a USB-C port that you can just plug in, get the information out or interact with it. You have a new monitor, you plug in the USB-C and you have now the connectivity. Now you don't need to worry about a different sort of ports. Yes, it was like that in the past. Whoever coming from that dinosaur age like myself, yes, we used to have the different ports. Now the USB-C is kind of like making that unified, whether it's your phone or anything. So MCP is nothing but that. If I simplify that for you, it's basically defining that protocol. Basically, you don't need to hard connect with actual tools and all that. Whereas as far as an MCP enabled implementation, basically AI chat tools can sort of like use the natural language to connect with it and actually interact with it. So in other words, if you have an API, which you're going to look at later today, that used to be like, you need to write the API in a certain way. You need to write the API in JSON and all that authentication, everything has to be done. With MCP, all you got to do is say something in natural language, LLM actually do the smarts and the heavy lifting behind it and basically connect with that intended server and actually get it done for you. So it's kind of like that USB-C port that I took as the example. All you are doing is you are naturally putting your intention into your chat, and the LLM is doing the heavy lifting to do that connectivity and all that. But for an AI tool or any of those chat tools to work beautifully, it needs to get some information, because it's no longer just like an endpoint. You need to tell where to get authenticated, where to look at for the authentication, what sort of like scope you need, like in terms of permissions you need to access with this API. You need to tell a lot of those things. Now, MCP on its own is not going to do that, but like I said, we are still in the basics. We are going to do the talk today to expand all that other topics, but to get an understanding, I have got this sequence diagram, which is actually quite interestingly show the different participants of the MCP. So if you think about the MCP itself, it's actually three parties in that. One is the actual what we call the host, where the actual what you see as a chat window, right? So I'm simplifying some of this terminology for some along to come, so all of us to come along. The MCP host is nothing but your chat client. So in other words, your chat client where you actually put your prompts in. The LLM, that all the models that you have, whether you call Gemini or OpenAI and all that, that's the reasoning behind it. So that's where it's on the top, that's LLM. Now in the far end or in between that you see the MCP server. Now MCP servers can be something within your box as well as remote servers. Now that's how the implementation, it's nothing but a server. For now, think it like a resource server. Can be an API, can be something to fetch and file or do something in the remote server. It's kind of like the server implementation that we all know, like APIs and all that. Consider for now that is the case. Now if you think about the flow of the things, as a user who's sitting on the far left side is typing something into the request like a query, and that going to be interpreted by the LLM as a second step and going to find out what this user is trying to do. And it's looking at the host capabilities. One of the things is like it defines is these are the tools available for me to do certain operations. In that there are definitions, there are ways that we can define those tools, and the LLM says, you know what, I see a tool that this might be the one that user is intending, and a rightful MCP client maybe prompt that. Now we can do everything without prompting, but a proper MCP client, again these are all defined in the MCP protocol, a client should actually ask, is that what you mean? Because there might be tools with the same names and same descriptions. Users might be like getting weather. You may have a couple of different services. Now you need to make sure what the user is asking is correct. So they may prompt you for that and say, are you meaning this? And once you approve, and it will go and make that call. Now you didn't write the code, you didn't write any of that connectivity. It interpreted that, and the client requests now go to the MCP server. Whether it's local or remote doesn't really change. It's that implementation. And MCP does that workload and come back with a response. Again, it can be a file or it can be another response like what we all know as JSON, which comes back, but it's not going to throw back to the user and say, hey, here's a half a page worth of a JSON object. You understand whatever you want. Instead, LLM is going to consume that and actually interpret that in a way so that the user will now see a standard nicely decorated response. And that's what the entire sort of like loop through that. If you look at the journey, that's what it keeps happening. Every time you chat, there's actually a lot of this decision making happening behind the scene for you. If you think about the hero of the day is the MCP servers. That's what we're going to focus on today. Now I don't have enough time to cover all the perspective. Actually there are enough blogs coming on my own blog, which is actually covering all these aspects. But the MCP server is the focus for what we are going to discuss today. One thing I actually intentionally leave out is step 0. Step 0 was sitting there all along. Everyone saw that, but no one actually questioned me. But step 0, this is the actual heavy lifting happening in the MCP server side, where actually connectivity happens, connections are exchanged, capabilities are exchanged between the client and the server, and say what you can do, what I can't do, things like that is on the step 0. Now step 0 in most of the implementation, if you look at it today, like go and look at for 10 articles, 9.5 out of them will be excluding that because everyone worries about that front end part. The actual protocol is actually happening at the step 0, where the actual exchange of information happens. The client and the server kind of like handshake with each other, can share what they can do and cannot do. They sort of like exchange that metadata behind the scene, and then the client and the host is now aware of that there is a server who's going to serve certain type of requests, whether it's a weather or whether it's a library or whether it's whatever that services are that you have exposed will be actually coming from that exchange step 0. Now the MCP server still have to define all that because that's where the exchange happen, and there's a part that MCP server has to play to make this work. That's what we are going to look at today. Now to set the scene today, so that I'm going to level the field for everyone. I'm going to start with a legacy application that we all like, right? Simple, no extra work. It's just a simple library API. We all have seen enough libraries by now, enough APIs by now, and we all know how APIs work and API authentication. We have heard and we have enough worked on those topics. But for my today's topic, I'm going to use this specific, my imaginary library that actually create a couple of endpoints that I actually can talk you through today, how I'm going to use and convert this very same implementation into an MCP enabled implementation. Now, on the very top, I have something called library search, which is going to be a publicly available. No one need to authenticate. It's a public endpoint that anyone can search for books. And then I have some personal endpoints, which is like my library, which I can borrow a book or return a book, or even ask my server and say basically what books I have borrowed in the past, when their due dates and all that. And also there are some other endpoints like close my account and also upgrade of a membership. Now, close my account seems to be a bit destructive, like it's once in a while it will be done. You're closing your account. Same as the membership upgrade here in the API, it's actually very good, but unfortunately I haven't done the downgrade path, or put in the upgrade is there, but there's no downgrade. So I'm not ready to expose that in the MCP just yet. So this is my current legacy application. I'm going to build up an MCP application as we speak, focusing on these areas and how can I have different choices to make an expose of these APIs the same way that the API does, but MCP specific way. Any questions before I move on to the MCP side? Nope. All right, MCP 101. That's the last slide from my last talk. Pretty much, if you want to make it an MCP of any of your current implementation, it's very easy. Add 3 lines, your server is now MCP server. Beautiful, right? That's easy. Basically, all you're saying is you are putting into the request pipeline, or basically dependency pipeline. You are saying, hey, add the MCP server capability with the HTTP transport. There are standard input-output paths as well, but in this case, we are just using HTTP transport, and we are simply saying with the tools from the assembly. Wow, that's easy. We are such lazy on that way. We just say scan the assembly for everywhere you can see, and if you see this sort of like definition, consider that as MCP tool, because an MCP tool is a simple method, but with decorations like that. So it's first on the top says this is an MCP tool, and then it gives a bit of a description. Basically, this is what the metadata that your LLM is going to see when the capabilities come out from that server. The server is going to say, hey, I have this tool that is going to give you a 5-day weather forecast for a specific city. Simple as that. But also I have another description on the parameter. I'm going to accept a city name as a parameter. So that's a way of communicating that this is my tool, this is the tool description, and this is the parameters I accept. Now, this is a very small example, but you can extend this to however you want, to how many parameters you want, and also have some guardrails implemented, like whether you want to allow only certain types of values like a enum. You can all define that in that. Now, this is as simple as that. You know what, when this happens, everyone in the MCP, when they heard about all these MCP servers, and now everyone who had that legacy APIs thought, wow, that's easy. Developers, be AI first. Go and implement this. Now all of our APIs now becomes MCP capable. Wow. But we forgot something. When we are developing just an application versus when we are developing enterprise level application, there's a huge difference, right? We make applications basically to make sure that things can work. We all know that with technology by now, if not already clear, we can do anything that we can put our mind into it, right? There's no limitations in that. We can actually implement the tools and the application whatever we want to do certain, solve certain problems that we have. However, when we come to the enterprise application, we got to think about a bit differently, especially if you are engineers, if you are architect. Doesn't matter you are a developer, you're going to come to my stage one day, going to think the same way, because hereafter it's not about application, that application that solves a problem. You got to start thinking differently. You got to think about, you're handling people's data. You have, you're handling people's like payment information, bank details. Today you go into the news and you find out whole lot of information about, data leakages, all that information, AI attacks and all that. Why is that is happening? Because someone was rushing in to implement something, to become the first of something, but they forget the fundamentals. Right? Just because someone says add the 3 lines, add that tool definition, all your legacy servers are now MCP capable, that's not the truth. You need to do a lot more than that. It was good as an example to get the basics out to everyone. I included myself, like 12 months ago, I did the very same talk. Hey, let's make all our APIs MCP capable, MCP with that 3 lines. However, when you come to the enterprise level, we got to think a bit differently. That's what this talk is about. What are we going to do? Like we already know, we know how we protect our APIs, we know how to authenticate our APIs. So we're going to look at what things we do at the MCP layer to make a similar approach as we're going forward. So vulnerabilities in MCP. Now this is not the core of the topic, but I want to put that slide because I want to understand, right, with that simple explanation. If you think about that early example, it says find me a tool within this assembly that define an MCP tool, right? It was so lazy. You didn't even define the type. You didn't actually hard type the type. You just said find anything that describes the tool. Just imagine a junior developer comes in just because he got the nice LLM tools and all that. They just type. They're interesting. The first MCP tool is written. You don't know. It's sitting in the code now, and it's already a tool now, right? Because your assembly says take everything from this assembly that defines this sort of like metadata, which is now become a tool, right? That becomes the tool poisoning. Basically, you have a tool, and then you can also change the tools, tool information. You can have the tool, but we can make a mistake. Maybe it's doing a delete operation, but we put the wrong metadata onto it. If someone invoke it, it can be blown off your databases maybe, right? That's tool poisoning. The tool says that I'm going to do this, but tool internal is going to do something else. Now, if you think about putting that sort of like capability to the AI, and AI is thinking, oh, user is asking me to grab the weather, and calling that API is going to blow off a database in the back of it. That's too risky. So again, that's sort of like the vulnerabilities. I'm just going to give that one example. There are so much of other things, the privilege escalations and all that within the MCP context that where you're going to think about, where is this user can do this? Can we actually question that user? Are you sure you want to do this? Do you really want to get rid of your library membership? Do you want to close your account? Right? Do you question that? Because just because the users asked, I want to close my account, maybe user was asking for some other account, not the library account. But if it invoke a library account API or the MCP tool, it will create, basically it will clear off the user's the library. So those sort of that's the world we are working with, because it's so easy to implement. It's so easy to now communicate, and there's no hardwires and everything. It's a protocol. So all of a sudden, if you all implement all these MCP tools, now you have a plethora of tools available, and your LLM is confusing like us. Okay, I'm going to invoke the best tool that I think. Again, coming back to Karthika's talk, hallucination. Wow, I'll help my user because the user is asking me to do something, right? Therefore, I'm going to do whatever its best choice, but it may be not your intention. That's why, first thing first, whenever we want to protect our servers, APIs, what is the first thing we would do if you want to protect our APIs? Authentication and authorization. All right. So the first thing we look at the authentication part, because that's the starting point of it, right? That's the basics. Now, authentication with OAuth, which is basically the heart and soul of this. Now, assume that our API and MCP is sitting in the same server or sitting in the same code base. Now, basically need to bring everything into one single place to make sure that we are not handling two different things in two different ways. Now, this is no different to what we have already today. That's the one beauty of that. Because of the .NET, again, I'm not talking to all other libraries. This is specifically the .NET space or the C# space. I can actually tell that there is no requirement of doing anything special. All you got to do is the same way that you have today. You basically, put that authentication layer like we do today, basically saying, I want OAuth or JWT or the authentication enable, and then you basically saying some token validation parameters into that. However, there are a few things that you need to understand in this place. Now, most of your backends today more likely to work with another, even though it's not tightly coupled, more likely to work with your front end today, like a front end application or whatever it is. Now, that is designed to User get authenticated against that API resource, get the token, pass that token along to the backend server, and the server sees that, wow, okay, you are an accepted user, I know you, you have the rightful permission, then I can do the APIs. Whereas in MCP, you don't have the luxury. Because remember, the MCP tool definition says it's very loosely coupled, it doesn't say what client's going to come up. So every one of us may have different tools. We may be authenticated with those servers indifferently. So all of a sudden, we have our authentication context kind of like conflicting us, because we logged into those tools using an identity, not aware of what the tool or the backend server needs. So it's not a token issued for the backend; it's a token issued to use the actual the chat tool or that LLM host at that case. So you never know until you actually doing an operation what accessibility or what token you need to access a particular server. Until that moment, this server is going to be sit behind. Now when it comes, that token cannot be the same token that the application originally issued to itself, because we need a separate token. So most of the time, even though it's kind of like on record, I heard, it's unfortunate to say, a lot of organizations still today, they just look at the JWT and say, it's a valid user, I'm going to accept it because it's a valid as far as we know. Maybe coming from the same server, but you need to add bit more stronger input and validation. Like audience, is it issued for my scope, or is it a token issued by my authentication server, but not for myself? So you need to make that audience validation, basically making sure that is targeted for you. Now in MCP world, this is a bit challenging. Like originally you sign up with your own token to your own application, like the chat tools and all that. Now what is going to happen, because you can't send that token to a backend and say execute something on behalf of me. Now I said the important word, on behalf of me. So that's where OAuth actually expose a new, so like a flow that where you can do a on behalf of flow. Basically it's a way of saying that I am logged in as A and I want to access a server that is not originally designed. Here's my token for you right now, and give me a token that accesses that backend resource for me to do that operation. So that's what we call the OAuth, so like the on behalf of flow. Even though it's not MCP related, it just I'm putting that for everyone's understanding. That's sort of like the example that OAuth flow. There's nothing to do with MCP, like I said. Or if you look at the resources, the first application trying to talk to the API A, API A identifies that as, oh, I need to talk to API B, but I need a user's context to go into the API B as well. So at that point, you do an exchange on behalf. So you kind of like give that token back to the identity server and say, reissue me another token that I can go back to the application server B to get the work done as that user. So basically from application A, which is in our case the chat tool, application web API A can be the chat API's web API, which is the backend for that. But we are trying to talk to another remote server. At that point, we are going to exchange that token. That is where it's the like on behalf of token flow. That's going all the way end to end. Because when it's come to the MCP, you still need to be that user, right? You have to act as that user, not as a service, not as a what do you call hidden user that is sitting in, like, can do all of or the super account that you have. You can't do that. It's you who has to go all the way to end to end. So understanding that on behalf of flow is very important in that context. Now, authentication is done. So basically authentication did resolve who I am. But the next question is, what can I do, right? So that's very important to understand. What as who I am, now I have exposed myself, I'm Randy, I'm in there, what can I do? So my scope is coming to the picture now. What can I do in terms of these resources? Now it's very tempting. We already have seen the first part, which is for our applications, where we are saying an authentication policy, and we say the user has to be authenticated and the user has to have this scope. Now many places where we go into MCP implementation, they say, oh, you know what, I want to do everything that my API does in the MCP layer too. And everyone forgets that. And if API tokens, if API has a lot more capabilities than MCP, and if you issue a token for an MCP operation, that token is still valid to invoke something on your API, isn't it? Because you have given the same scope, same information. Like if you have shared in the scope between your MCP and API. If your token is issued to the same scope, the MCP tool, that token issued for MCP tool can be used, if you really wanted to, do API operations. That's not the intention. Now, a lot of people argue, why not? We are going to make that feature parity. We are going to go into like to like, but you're going to thank me later. At least have that separation on the top layer, right? On the top layer, you say that if it's MCP tool, that it's an MCP tool, because MCP tool has, remember, they are coming from the LLM side of things. They are more unpredictable than the actual the API, because API we more likely to know that's our front end coming and talk to us. With MCP, it can be anyone, so it's better to separate them out, and it will be better for other things like login and everything else as well. So that's the first thing, or the first input. Like the same thing that we know is the same line of code that we have seen, but just we are splitting that again like a design choice.
So would it be fair to say we should always give the principle of least privilege in the MCP scope to define as a subset of the whole scope?
Correct. Again, it doesn't need to be, depending on the, it's always an answer. As a consultant, I would say the answer is depends, but it's again, that's the thought process that you need to put onto your design. Are we going to do that, or is my MCP can be blown off too much that my APIs cannot cope up? Like, that's the question. But here's the design thought. It's the same line of code, but we are saying duplicate it for MCP, and that way it's easy. It's not really hard that way. We're just going into that and adding another scope into your app registration, right? I'm sorry if not everyone seen the back end side of things. This is where the scopes are getting defined, but this is the app registration. You just basically define another scope. Now, if you want both, you can issue the both. It's like, you're asking from any OAuth protocol, like, multiple scopes or like multiple access things. But all you're saying is MCP is designed for MCP, and anything in the API is designed for API, right? But if you want subset of the others, like other permissions, you can still expand that depending on their use case. Great question. Cool. Now, it is protected. Yes. Now, how do we inform that to rest of the world? Like, I am protected, you're trying to invoke me, and you're trying to ask me to do something, but where's my data? Where's my information, like the contract? Where do I say, hey, MCP, like, because our front end knows our back end information, we can all exchange all the details. But if it's so much of out there, all these MCP tools out there, how do we actually describe that to all the MCP tools and say, here's where the details are of my server. This is where you need to get authenticated from, and these are the scopes I support. We got a solution for that as well. It's RFC 97828, so 9728. I'm not memorizing that, I'm looking at the screen, but it stands for the OAuth protected resource metadata. So it's kind of like saying my resource, in this case MCP, is protected by OAuth. It's an OAuth standard way of saying, here's the resource metadata that if you want to access me, these are the information. In that spec, usually we define, basically that's an extra additional line that we do when you're doing the add MCP capability into our server. We just add that extra information. Here's where the resource metadata is. And the only important fact here is that's going to expose an endpoint in our same server under the well-known protected resource /MCP. In that endpoint, it's going to expose this information. It's basically a get endpoint, not authenticated. Now, there's a lot of arguments about this from the architects and enterprise architects. No, our servers are protected. We can't exchange that. But if I can't tell where to get authenticated from, no one is going to get authenticated to see this information. So this information cannot be authenticated. This is well known, that's why it's the stats for the URL is a well-known endpoint, basically saying this is where the information is and how to authenticate with me if you want to access my services. So whenever a service throws a 401 in the MCP world, we put that into the header saying this is where the endpoint to get the well-known endpoints, and that server then should be responsible to go and fetch that information and do the authentication. Now, the result of that is if you have that in your server, when you do that, now in this case these are my details or my application details, but you have the resource, this is where the resource. You have the authorization server, that's my AD server with the endpoint to the authentication. If you are talking with me, when you get the token, send that in the header, not in the payload, not anywhere else, send that in the header. And also these are the scopes I supported. Now of course I have only one scope, but you can have multiple scopes that you can support as well. This is for the example's sake. This is how you define that well-known endpoint. Now when your tools getting 401 are not like unauthorized, the server knows where to get that metadata. Server then knows, okay, I'll go to the login server or authorization server, and then it will do the other well-known endpoints and get the actual authentication details to basically. Now if that is allowed and if there is something that they are supported, that tool now can connect to you. All right, it's enabled, it's protected, and we already said where to get the keys from, right? So we said we informed that metadata to where to get the keys from. What's next? We still need to protect our operations. So we said where to do that. We can't just stop at that point and say, yeah, that's it. We told them securely where to get the keys from, but they still need to come into our house, and when you're trying to access different rooms, we need to make sure that each one of our rooms, in other words, each one of our operations are protected, because we want to find out that's the next layer. Not everyone who get the keys to do everything in our house. So what we can do? So it's a guest, remember? So it's that is going to come to our environment, and actually we are still going to check that extra permissions. Now in APIs, we do this simply, especially this is in minimal APIs. We just do this like saying, okay, the top one doesn't need any authentication because that's my library example, library search. I don't need any authentication, so don't worry about it. But you have this me endpoint, which is my personalized endpoint, borrow books, return books, and all that. I need that to be authenticated, but I'm using that scope that I defined earlier for the API and say this need to be protected by the API scope. Same way, now this is not unusual. We have seen this in the controllers as well, but it's no different in the MCP world, where you can use the same annotation to say this is a tool for searching books apart from the other information that we have on the top. That's an extra annotation that we do. Allow this operation anonymously. The other one says allow this operation only for the MCP policies. Now you can extend this to how many policies you want, how many applications or your own requirements, but this is the simplest example on that. But then the question, does everyone needs everything? No.
You only need like the minimum amount of permission to do like your work, and you shouldn't be like needing more than that.
Spot on. So again, just because we ask the person to come in, just because we trust the person to come into a house, we have said, we have explored the options. We are not saying yes, we are not going to tell them everything. Now this is a very big area of concern. Yes, just because you have like entire tool set that you can delete, you can update, you can like take the entire database off, whatever that operations, the heavy like sensitive operations, just because the user comes in, we should not say, hey, by the way, you do not have access, but I have this tool. We should not need to say that. We don't even to expose that. All we got to say is, if you're authorized, I'll tell you what tools you can do. I'm not going to say these are my operations that I can do, but you just because you don't have if they want to find out, you need to come with your tokens, you need to come with your identity, then I'll tell you what you can do, which rooms you can go into. So in order to do this, we just need to apply this simple line. Again, same definition of MCP server. All we're going to do is add that extra point saying add authorization filters. Just because we have annotated all our APIs to say what scope supported, whether it's allow anonymous and all that, when this hits, when the request comes in from the MCP client, say, hey server, what can you do? And the server asks, who are you? And the server says, like the response is, I am so and so, therefore these are the things you can do based on your permission, right? So does that sort of like come along now? So that's level of authorization filter. So you don't need to do, like you don't need to write plethora of code. It's actually baked into the SDKs now, but it hides that information from you. Like earlier on it's 3 lines, now you can see it's getting bloated, but that's all right. That's for an enterprise application. But because of that now, all of a sudden, yes, you have 100 tools, you are authorized only to do 10 tools, these are the 10 tools you can do. And these are the definition of that 10 tools with the head, like all the information of that tool's capabilities. Finally, few best practices that I'm going to conclude this sort of in a nice wrapped way, still valid for enterprises cases. Explicitly defined tools. Please do not use that find tools from the assembly. Please, 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 I'm going to beg you for that, right? That can dangerously go and actually harm your implementation very badly. Just imagine someone putting an MCP, like a simple class with that definitions on. you're going to expose your tools. So definitely know for that. This is what you got to do. Not hard. Just explicitly say what the tools are. Now, this can be still wrong if that tool has something that you didn't intend, that can go wrong. That's why we have PR reviews and all that. Now, again, if anyone in the architecture space, they cannot say that, you know, oh, I don't want you to expose that tools just because you expose that tool. Yes, that's why the PRs are. Like, it's like our code. If someone is writing a code for an existing tool, that's why we review to find out whether we should go and actually publish that. But by doing that, we are now stopping someone accidentally putting just a sample example inside the code without we seeing, and all of a sudden MCP get to know about it, and MCP starting going crazy for that. Finally, define your destructive tools. Like, that's a simple annotation. Again, extra a bit of information for MCP server tool. You have your name. You're going to say it's destructive. Now you're going to think, what's destructive in terms of, like, you know, it's not really a dangerous word like it sounds. Basically, it's a hint to the MCP client. Now, it's a MCP client's responsibility. Again, remember that there are three parties in this: LLM, MCP client, and MCP server. MCP server says this is a destructive tool. This is irrecoverable. You might do something that you are going to regret. So MCP client's responsibility to see this hint and actually ask the user, you sure want to do this? Ask that confirmation. But if you don't hint it, LLM wouldn't know that. LLM will like, oh, I'll do it, hunky dory, happy days. All right, so then the next one is read only. If your application is only, like if your MCP tool is just written in some tools, there's no harmful operations, again, giving that comfort to the LLM. Oh, it's read only, there's nothing going to be wrong with that. So you can actually invoke that tool. Basically, it says, it's basically like a get calls. Like, but again, if you write within a get call, if you write, you know, other operations, that's your loss. But this is the right way of tool level that you're just saying it's a read only. Now, like I said, as an implementation, as developers, they can write whatever the body. They can write operations to delete something in this call. But that's why the PR reviews and everything else as a development team we work on. Finally, ID portent, which is very important again in the cloud world, because when something goes wrong and if MCP is like, oh, something translatable, let me retry that again, and you're going to submit 10 orders for me and my credit card going to be charged for 10 times. You don't want to happen that. So you want to actually say, is this ID portent safe or not? If it's safe, doesn't matter how many times you call. You can actually keep calling. Set the temperature to 70 degrees. Doesn't matter how many times you call, it's going to be 70 degrees. But place an order. Again and again, you're going to place an order. So be careful on that. Server can handle that. So we should actually do all that implementation. That's our best practices. But this is way of tool saying that do not retry this operation again. If something happens, maybe ask the user if they want to retry. That's an important one as well. Cool. And the final one, which is kind of like there are two flavors onto it. Now, because of I had the application today, I had to use the one on the top, which is basically because I have anonymous tools as well. So I need to say at the top level MCP, do not worry about authentication. Let the tools take care of the authentication on their own. But if you are coming from an enterprise application, which I just completed my own implementation for one of my clients, they actually said, you know what? I don't want anyone to talk to my MCP if they're not authenticated. Don't even ask anything like tools, what you can do, nothing. Unless you're authenticated, you're out. I only trust you once you're authenticated. Have that extra line into your MCP implementation. Otherwise, what's going to happen is your tool, you can do that hi and handshake behind the scene, which is that step 0 that you saw, that all that can happen if you don't have that line. They can exchange information and say, hello, I'm so and so, and what tools you can do and all that. Now, the risk of that is if you have a tool that is allow anonymous, that will end up in that. But having this, everything's locked down very immediately. Very quick demo. Good for time? Beautiful. Now, bit of a disclaimer that I've already run out of my credit because it's AI involved. And by the time that I test, as a good developer should do, all my credits, all my free credits coming from Microsoft is been burned out. So I'm on my pay-as-you-go account. I put up a budget for $65 to make sure that it's not going to blow up any more than that. But I'm happy to see, and because of that, I've already reduced the SKUs of my app services to bare minimum. Just in case if you see some errors, just say a quick prayer to demo God and say, let it go. All right. Cool. Is that? If I can do this, that's great. Oops. Oops. Where's the mouse? Oops. There you go. And another disclaimer, I have actually forgotten my mouse. I'm actually using William's mouse, which is sitting vertically, which have no use of how to use it. Anyway, that's basically an example of the well-known endpoint. Oops. Good question. Oops. I don't know how the hell Zoom works here. No, this one doesn't. I was trying this earlier on. I don't know why. No, nothing. This is not helping. But this is the same example that we had in the well-known endpoint. Basically, it says the well-known endpoint, the same example that I had in my slides. So I wouldn't worry about it, but I just had it open in case if anyone interested to see it live. This is just the library API. It's currently live, and that's an API that you guys can hit. But the thing is, you don't have authorization, so you can't do much about it. What I want to find out is the Foundry. Now, just in case, I've used the two backups, so I'm going to use the backup ones first because I trust the backup ones should work. The first one is no authentication. So how the no authentication works is, what I've done is the same server I've configured twice, just because to avoid logging in, logging out, and it doesn't happy to take all that. What I've done is I've actually created two tools pointing to the same MCP server. One has auth, one doesn't have auth. So what I've done is MCP tool with no auth. So it's simple as view. There you go. It says unauthenticated. So this tool is still going to be talking to this MCP server / MCP of my web service, but it's unauthenticated. So the tool's expectations are we should get only the search for library books, nothing else, because I'm unauthenticated. If I'm authenticated, I should have a lot more capabilities. In the authenticated one, just for everyone's benefit, I'll show them together so that they can quickly remember the difference. This one is about authenticated one. I say auth identity pass-through. Really sorry for say this on record. Hate Microsoft for this. They change in the business behavior or the words. This is on behalf of authentication, but they just say pass-through. So I had to do a lot of digging to find out what is the pass-through means. Pass-through means on behalf of authentication. Because I'm logged in as myself, and when I try to invoke that tool, what it does is behind the scene it will do the tools chain and actually do that exchange, the token, and that token exchange token will be sent out to the MCP, not my token that is I'm currently using for my Azure Foundry itself, right? In that there's nothing sensitive, so I can show you the configurations as well. Basically, these are all configurations coming from that well-known endpoint, but all that is being defined now, kind of given the scope as well. I should be able to zoom this one in at least. Nope. No, I don't want to change anything. No. All right, I will not touch that. Okay. That's pretty much in terms of the configuration. So basically, remember, it's the same tool, but same MCP server, but define them as two tools for my use so that I can demonstrate it without actually logging in and out. Going on to the agents, I have got, this is nothing but if anyone's wondering, this is just Foundry having a play around so that I can actually use something for MCP with live, with online. So let's try it with the no auth one. Bit of instructions. I've given that friendly instruction to the MCP saying that you are a friendly library assistant, therefore be nice. If someone asks you to find me a book, I'll find it. If I'm not authenticated, I do not want to go into the internet and find books about it from the internet. So basically, I've given that instructions. I've said if I'm not authenticated, just please say that I'm not authenticated and things like that. And I've defined my MCP tools as a available tool within that. So let's try to find me a good book for or related to testing. Let's hope this is not the greatest one, but let's see if we have the other one.
Sorry, Randy, what happened to that one?
Okay, so it's trying to talk to my MCP server, and because my MCP server is actually maybe it's not hydrated now. It's kind of like gone in this queue, like sleeping now. So it's not helping me at all, but let's see in case, because this was actually the other backup I had. Book on testing. If this, no, sorry. Demo wise, not a good one. Let me see if the authenticated one is going to do any better. If not, I'm going to apologize. That's about the demo. Everything I said, it's not going to be helpful. Okay, let's find some C# books. If not testing, C# should. No. All right. So MCP, it's my side, so I'm going to take that on. My SKU is kind of like lowered down to almost to a level that it's not functioning at all. But the idea is that if it's authenticated, it should have actually given me the tools of the MCP search capabilities with my configuration currently on, and that search would have been actually said, here's the book, and then I could have done the actual operations, say borrow me a book and all that. The only thing I really want to show you is the closing my account one. Foundry actually has already caught up with all the latest conventions. When it sees the destructive flag in it, it actually says, hey, you're going to do this operation, it's irrecoverable, do you want to do this? Please type in the word that I actually said that in the instruction. It's going to actually ask to retype that in the chat, so that it will actually take that as double confirmation before it executes. Now, unfortunately, it's not going to help. It's service returning 500 because service down. But coming on to the slide back again very quickly. Oops. Cool. Demo didn't work. Beautiful. So the one that I want to sort of give you the workflow is not zoomed in. The best I can do is maybe stand here and actually help you sort of walk through. So from the top, that's where we have the authentication well-known endpoint. So these are the step zero steps like in the first part. So the first thing happens is, do I need authentication? I get a 401 because if I'm protected API, the first thing that I guess you are not authorized 401 with a well-known endpoint where to get exchange that information from, like where to get authentication from. So that comes in the well-known endpoint. Well-known endpoint is read by the MCP client, and client sees that, oh, these users need to be authenticated against this server. Have I got the trust between that? Yes. Then I'll exchange the token and actually come back to that and then authenticate, and then ask the tool, hey, I'm authenticated now, what tool capabilities you have. Basically, first call happens is, I'm so and so, and then the MCP server returns all the tool capabilities based on the authentication, and then it will start say, okay, let's call this tool. Basically, there's a user input comes up, and the user says, I want to search for a book or borrow a book and all that. Basically, that call goes back to the MCP as a tool call. Tool call inside the server side, we are not matching here. Server do all the validation, authentications and all that, checks and balances, and it returns the response and keep coming out. This is a cycle that keep happening like throughout in that life cycle. It's like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that 8 again goes back to 0, because in every session, every chat session, it's kind of like making sure that you have the latest tool and all that, because while you're having that chat session, API may have redundant one of the capabilities. So you don't want to come up with the old tool definition and say try to invoke something, or API might have exposed a new endpoint or new parameters. So it wants to use that every time. It's a simple call. It's still one endpoint call happening to the MCP. That reminds me, if I have quickly to show my storage account, if that still is not blown off. Oops. That's not the storage account. That should be the storage account. There you go. Couple of samples when the actual demo was working. So this is not faking. So basically, as you can see, just focus on this area. But there are calls that is happening. As you can see, these are all MCP protocol operations. Basically saying what tools you have. This is the first one, says initialize with the tools information, And then like that, I'm going to show you. This is sort of like one call that I have, like end-to-end chat. The next one happens is it's going to say notification. So it's going to say handshake is done. So the MCP server and the client says handshake is done. They get to know each other. It's like people behind the scenes. Amazing that they say hi, hello, and then say I can do this. Yes, these are my versions and all that information. Then the next thing happens is that's basically what it's trying to do. Oh, that's basically saying I'm authenticated, and that's the second time that's happening because the authenticated call comes next. Then the tool list, that's returning the tool list. In the request body, I can see the tool list has been returned. That's basically saying these are my capabilities, these are my tool list that is available for that authenticated user. And finally, I think the next one it should be an invoke. Actually, that's an initialize. Actually, the second one is initialize, and then that's a tool call. Basically, a tool call happens. Basically, that's the invocation of the actual tool and say do something. Again, what I've done is in my request pipeline, I've said log everything that is coming /MCP, log that to a Cosmos, just in case this demo didn't work, that I have some evidence state somewhere that actually these operations happen. So that step 0 is what actually doing all this. Initialize, saying hello, get into that, know that, exchange the tool's information and get to know that tool, and then the LLM sees the rightful tool, invoke that tool, and then the invocation happens, then a response happens, and the LLM actually interpret that to the user. That's sort of like the cycle keep happening, and that's pretty much it. Before any questions.
There you go, nice and sudden. Here you go.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I completely understood what the MCP and authorization and authentication looks like. I wanted to ask, like, it completely makes sense to give an authentication, but can your MCP also request for an access? For example, the way you write down, like, can you find the books? For example, it doesn't find the books. You say you don't have the access to do that. But can you itself ask for the access in the Foundry and get the request gone to the manager or someone who can authorize you to do that?
That's again application specific, nothing to do with MCP. It's a workflow in that way. So if you want a certain user, like let's say something need to happen at the that's sort of like a workflow level approval. Let's say books is not a great example. Let's say you're trying to you're trying to do something and you need an someone else's approval. That can be an application side of implementation where you put up a request and that can end up with as an email or whatever, and that need to be consumed and all. You can do that as an application, but not as an MCP tool now, because MCP chat, in other words, between you and your client and the server. That's the tool chain. If you want something else to happen externally, that means, and it's an application level change where you need to drop some sort of like a communication or a SMS or email, whatever, that's your application specific logic.
So can I also connect that MCP to another application?
You can call MCP, like tool chaining can happen, yes. Okay. That's definitely possible. That's available in the tool chaining. Right now in my chatbot, I only have that tool. I actually have one of my enterprise clients actually doing this. So again, there's nothing hidden in that information. Basically, they have safety information coming up, and there are tools available, and say create me an audit for this, and the tool will actually create the audit from the safety information we got from somewhere else. It's kind of like a connected. So one tool gives the safety information, like the get information gives the safety incidents and all that. The other tool actually responsible to make the audit for that. So it's two different tools. The tool chaining happens. All you got to say is give me the latest data and actually make a audit out of it. So first call happens, second call happens, and then finalize with the audit.
And also, we provide the permissions, can we also make it role-based permissions?
You can. Again, it's all back to the API. The same thing that you can do at API, the MCP can do. It's just that you have to do that, properly, decorate it with the right permissions and scope. Everything in the API we can do at MCP as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Andy? Yes. You've got to make it a tricky one.
Yeah, you're there for that.
It's a simple one. In terms, your demo didn't go as per planned.
Yeah.
You said all of your resources got consumed. So can you tell us what consumed the most and how do we play around with this with our time?
Okay, so great question. Nothing to do with MCP. It's about how to manage your budget. The most important burnout point is actually LLMs actually trying to do that, calls. My entire budget was actually spent on the actual MCP, the Foundry AI calls. Like, because I'm doing tool calls, because I didn't have that instructions at the beginning. That's the biggest mistake that I had. Instructions, what it does is it sees my tools, but sees that it's not authenticated. It go rogue and kind of trying to fetch from an API from public search, like good actual C# books from internet. And I'm like, I didn't ask you to do that. Then I had to remove the internet tools, like, web search, remove from the Foundry, have an explicit instruction in my agent saying, if you don't have, do not go and assume things, and do not go and create, or find arbitrary, results. That was the biggest blowout. Didn't realize it until too late, but that was the key information. Instructions.
One final question. Yes, we got one more.
So I have a scenario. Let's say your tokens are getting burned out. What are some of the tips? How do you reduce the token cost and optimize the cost to run a particular application which you built around AI?
Completely MCP related, more for
general
Karthika's
AI,
question.
yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
oh, there you go.
No worries, guys. Of course, we are using tokens every day, and it does take time. So I want you to limit the answer. If you're asking any model about something, be specific and ask it to answer in, like, if you want the answers only one line. Give it specific instruction, answer me only one line. Give me instructions, answer me in 200 words. Otherwise, it will go all beyond and give you the answer in 2000 words, and your limit of the tokens is gone. So clear instructions, very important. Whatever you want, just ask, like, to the point.
Output tokens are more expensive than input.
Yes. So
Yes.
for anyone who's doing development in Copilot, I've got a Copilot instructions on my own development. I say, do not summarize what you just did unless I ask for, right? Because it takes its liberty. It do one simple change, like one line of change, and it comes up with a half a page worth of a documentation, like saying that I did this things, like, that's too much. So I have an instruction saying, unless I ask to, can you explain, or explicitly ask that, do not come up with your own explanation what you just did, because I can understand code.
Yeah, I think one I put in my instructions, and like in ChatGPT as well, to always have simple responses, and if I want more, I'll ask for more. Yeah, so it always starts with a simple response, and then you can drill down from there.
Yeah, output tokens expensive.
Output tokens are expensive, so
Extra chocolate for that. That's a great answer.
All right.
Thank you very much,
Randy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if anyone wants resources, that's
here's a lot of links on the screen.
well, it's one GitHub repository.
One GitHub repository and a blog post. Yeah.
And
if you share that with us, we can put it on the website, on
Sure.
LinkedIn, and everyone can grab your stuff.